A warm welcome to all our viewers to our series Natural Medicine. Today we'd like to talk to you about cell electrics, about the cell membrane potential, about a healthy cell that has a high tension to a less healthy cell that has a low potential, and what can be done to increase this cell membrane potential again, and to increase the self-healing powers of us all again. I invited a health analyst to do this. Welcome, dear Peer Zebergs. Thank you for having me. Thank you for coming. Nice to have you back, because I keep talking to you about this cell membrane potential. It's always about true healing coming from the cell. Well, that's indeed the case, but we've known that for 100 years, to be precise. I don't know how they measured that 100 years ago, but they figured it out, so they were simply brilliant scientists. And a healthy cell always has a minimum cell membrane tension of at least minus 70 millivolts, typically minus 70 to minus 90 millivolts. If the tension decreases because it's mutated or it's damaged, it's inflamed, there are toxins in it, or has developed into a tumour cell, then this electrical cell membrane potential is reduced to minus 50 millivolts or less, or tumour cells usually only have minus 15 millivolts. That's all they have. If I have an inflamed cell, it's at minus 30, 35 millivolts, and you can work on it and basically bring this cell membrane tension back up. Only then can the cell really function. I want to quickly go through these numbers again. So minus 70 to minus 80, healthy cell. Then it decreases, and there's probably pain first. I don't know if there has to be pain involved. I don't think so. Okay, but then we come to the area of inflammation. Well, I'm at minus 35, minus 40 millivolts. I once read a tumour cell is somewhere between minus 15 and 20. I never have more than minus 15 millivolts there. Okay, and at zero there's cell death. That's it. Okay, so now we have a cell somewhere that's not entirely healthy. It's inflamed. Inflamed means it has a lack of electrons. Yeah, but it could also be that there are toxins in it. Inflammation arises in order to repair something, so inflammation is always a repair process. You have to see it. Then I probably have a lack of electrons, that's right. Okay, then I have this inflammation, an electron deficiency, and now you can just deacidify this cell, or I can bring in electrons. Or how does it normally happen that the cell regenerates itself again? Well, first of all, a lot of inflammation is caused by toxins. We have an incredible amount of toxins, but this also includes acidic molecules. For example, acidic molecules are found in the main transit routes of our body. They're often stored in the connective tissue. Because they should not get into the cells, so we store them somewhere in the connective tissue. And from there, inflammations develop in the surrounding tissue. Now, as a rule, I have to make sure that I eliminate toxins first. Of course, you need water, which is a possible means of transport. We've talked about it a couple of times. A water that's actually not saturated, so that it has a maximum of 40 other particles for every 1 million water molecules in it. That's called 40 ppm. That would actually be ideal. And then I get these toxins out. That would be a measure. It works relatively well, and then the inflammation decreases. If the inflammation somehow persists for a longer period of time, the body must take a precautionary measure. That's called calcification, because if the inflammation lasts too long, if it becomes chronic, this inflammation would cause a great deal of damage. So I have to stop this inflammation. What is the body doing? It takes calcium out of bones or from food, if you're lucky enough to have it, and calcifies this inflammation, then at least the inflammation stops. It's also a way of what the body does. The body is something completely ingenious, and you have to see everything that the body initiates as an initial measure is a useful special biological measure. So I always say that every illness, every symptom, every pain in the early stages is a sensible biological special measure to draw attention to it. On the one hand, it's a precautionary repair measure. On the other hand, it's a message to you that you have to change something. You have to eliminate some of the causes now. Sure. So I want to go back again. When someone has pain anywhere on their body, knee hurts, fingers hurt, an elbow hurts, whatever, then it's actually always connected to a deeper cell electrics. That's right. And if I were to act here now and I would charge this cell electrics, for example, with frequencies or with frequencies and currents that have been around 100 years, then the pain should go away. At least initially, I can speed up the repair process. It may not go away immediately, but it usually goes away with multiple treatments. It's also my experience what I have in the Cell Energy Centre. That is, with people who have chronic pain or inflammation, we get it under control relatively quickly by supplying energy. But you have to supply the right energy, these signals with minus 70 millivolts. Well, now we have a cell, it's extremely small, and in this cell there are these power plants, these mitochondria. To what extent is there also a drop in the potential or energy in this mitochondria? Or do they produce less ATP? Or, well, it's like that. If there are toxins in it or inflammations or something like that, then first the body has to worry about other things than energy supply. And even with tumour cells, for example, it's really crazy. If I have a tumour cell that only has minus 15 millivolts, it has a different metabolic process. It's fermentation instead of oxygen metabolism. And then the mitochondria produce maybe 1/10 of the energy that they can normally produce. So energy is then expressed as our currency in the body, that's ATP, adenosine triphosphate. There's less energy production. This, of course, weakens the overall system again, because I need energy for every measure. An illness is always defined as an absence of energy or absence of the immune system, simply because there's not enough energy available there. You prepared an experiment to show that briefly. May I ask you to show it? So, that's how we do it at my Cell Energy Centre. The device is called Celltuner. Goes back to the biggest, in my opinion, inventor of all time, Nikola Tesla, and he recognised it 100 years ago, that not only information can be transmitted with electromagnetic waves, but also energy. And that's how we do it. And that's the right impulse. That's the minus 70 millivolts we can use. The fact that this can also be transmitted wirelessly is a miracle for many, and it just works like that. And this is where this minus 70 millivolt comes out. Exactly. And if that hits a cell, a painful spot, rheumatism, gout or something, then it goes into the cell and the energy goes up. And because of this, the cell is again able to mobilize self-healing powers to reduce inflammation. Yeah, maybe you'll do something else. Grab the green antenna with your whole hand. Now there's nothing left, everything is absorbed by the body. And these cellular electrics have different aspects. And then you see how brilliant people used to be. They also knew earlier that a healthy cell has a much higher electrical resistance than a diseased cell. For example, a healthy cell has an electrical resistance of 2,500 ohms. A sick cell, a very sick cell like a tumour cell, still has 300 ohms. And what about electricity? It's exactly the same as water. It flows where it can flow most easily, where it has the least electrical resistance. This means that this impulse finds even the worst cell, where the energy can be used most. It's absolutely brilliant. And the other story is still, there's no such thing as an overdose. There are devices for muscle training where you also work with electrical currents to stimulate muscle contraction to activate them without having to move yourself. A fine thing also works very well. I always have the feeling that there are a few additional aspects that should be taken into account, namely the cell content. When I put on currents, the current only runs when ions line up at the poles. That is, negatively charged ions go to the positive pole, positively charged ions go to the negative pole. And what happens here? I change the cell contents. They go out through the cell membrane. It's a deacidification. That's a question of whether there is a deacidification, whether the positively or negatively charged ions go out. Can be the good and bad ions that go out. If I have too much sodium in it, I'll be glad when it goes out. If I have a lot of potassium in there, it's the other way around. So the question is always, it can be seen from two sides. And they have already taken that into account. This is such a high frequency that several millions of times per second, the frequency changes direction. So there's no cell content change, therefore there's no overdose. They were already thinking about it 100 years ago. This is now a significant advancement where some disadvantages, which they had 100 years ago, are already taken into account. These disadvantages no longer exist today. Well, it all seems like it used to be when cancer therapies were done. That was before the Second World War, when you simply took two batteries and ran electricity through the tumour. And then the current also took the path of least resistance, so down into a malignant cell and boiled here for so long until the tumour was cooked from the inside out. This is still done today. Well, it's interesting. What is the real cause of a tumour? You always have to treat the root cause. Okay, I have a low cell membrane voltage there. Why is this happening? A tumour also develops. It's also a sensible biological special measure of the body in the early stages. It has to do a job. For example, Russian science says there's no cancer patient who doesn't have a lack of adrenaline. You have a lack of adrenaline when the adrenal cortex, which produces adrenaline, is exhausted because it has had to work forever. People were under stress for a long time and had worries for a long time. They've had toxins in the body for a long time. Stress, stress, stress. Electric smog always gets you into this stress mode. So I've been under too much stress for way too long. The adrenal cortex can no longer produce this adrenaline. Why does it play a role in tumour formation? Because normal cellular metabolism is like this. Insulin brings sugar into the cell, and it's not 100% burned. There's still a lot of residual sugar, and it has to be transported. Adrenaline does that job, and now I'm low on adrenaline. It won't be discharged. It won't be discharged. What would happen? I'd get the worst symptoms of severe diabetes. I could lose sight. I could lose a leg. Would have meant death in evolution. Now the body comes and says, okay, now you have to do something. Here's mortal danger. We have to buy time. What does it do? It seals itself off from oxygen with a lactate, a lot of lactic acid basically, switches the metabolic process to fermentation and burns 18 to 20 times more sugar than a normal cell would metabolize. Plus, also takes over the function of a second liver. That means this cell pulls in, like a sponge, parasites, fungi, spores, all sorts of pathogenic germs and destroys them. You know what? I've never had that explained so credibly and so simply. And actually, it's a beneficial reaction of the body. Yeah. Every illness is a sensible special biological measure in the early stages. But if you don't recognize this as a hint to do something about the real cause to eliminate it, it usually always leads to death. It's like that, for example, when people have diarrhea. In the beginning, toxins have to be taken out. If I don't shut off the toxin now, it will continue forever, and people get dehydrated and die. Hypertension is the same. It's a useful special biological measure to break down plaques, better circulate blood in certain vascular units, bring more oxygen to the vessels, and so on and so forth. And there's a problem I need to solve. And that applies for every single measure by the body biologically meaningful in the initial stage. Now, I have to recognize this as a hint to eliminate the real cause. Then, for example, a tumor cell can vanish if I say, for example, okay, I'll regenerate the liver, spleen, and adrenal cortex. That's the triumvirate that plays together. If I can do that, the tumor cell can grow back into a healthy cell, because then it's done its job. So the cause is gone then. Then the effect no longer has to be, it can regress. And with cancer cells, there are many, many discussions, also very contradictory discussions. In any case, we know now that parasites and fungi play a huge role in carcinogenesis, possibly even being cancer themselves. There's a Russian scientist who defends this thesis with vehemence. Lebedeva is her name. There are also many American scientists who vehemently support this thesis argumentatively, because also products or medicines or something that help against malaria, for example, in such epidemics, if you take it, that usually helps, and diabetes or a tumour, for example, are gone. So there's something to it. And now it's about what can we do here. If there's something to it, or it's parasites, or cancer cells behave like parasites, react the same, then what do I have to do? Then I must create fever. Why does the body have a fever? It makes fever to raise the temperature. With the elevated temperature, I can kill viruses, pathogenic germs, bacteria, fungi, spores, everything. So I have to see that I can generate a fever. And earlier, a very well-known scientist said in ancient times, give me the power to create artificial fever, I'll heal every disease. What do we have here now? Well, this is being done today in tumour treatment with this type of hypothermia. Yeah, you put them in whole, I would say boxes, closed boxes like that. And there the temperature is raised to 41, 42, 43 degrees Celsius. So that's the last measure that can take effect here. People then almost collapse. It's almost inhuman, but it helps, then so be it. He who heals is right. We have a simpler method, but on a small scale. Of course, it can only support all the other measures of classical medicine, never replace them. So the doctor is still the boss here, but this is a measure. It supports the body to create an artificial fever, and only where the problem is. So if I go here now, these impulses get into the cell that's weakest, and there the mitochondria, our energy centres, are activated so strongly that they generate enormous heat from within the cell. How do you know which cell is your weakest, the one that hurts the most? No, where it gets hot. But are you now going all the way along the body with the staff and see where it gets hot? Well, if you wanted to use it diagnostically perfectly, you would still have to, or we do that in Stuttgart. At the manufacturer, you have to add a thermal imaging camera. There was a case where the orthopaedic surgeons treated one soccer professional and said, we have to operate on the knee because it's always inflamed, we can't fix it. We have to operate on it, something's wrong there. And then a physiotherapist was with him, put his hand on and also worked with his Celltuner. Then he said, I can irradiate here, nothing gets hot on the knee. So now I feel like it's not the problem. Then he basically took the thermal imaging camera and examined other areas around the knee and found that there was tremendous heat build-up above the knee. And they treated that for 2 or 3 weeks, and he then played again without knee surgery. So you can use it for diagnostic purposes. But if I, for example, now I hold the antenna somewhere on the body, when I turn it on, it doesn't change thermally, so the antenna does not get a degree Celsius warmer, but the cells react, and especially those where something needs to be repaired. And then the spots get hot, and then it's like this. For example, if you put it to your ear, it can get extremely hot. Then you have to put it away again. And then you touch the antenna, nothing happened here, it's just not hot. And why is it hot here? Because the ear represents the whole body, like the hands or the feet represent the whole body, or like the teeth have a correlation to all the inner organs, or the spine has a correlation to the other organs. Then I talk to everything that the ear represents, and then it gets hot somewhere there. From there I can say, okay, here's the lung point, here's that point, and from there I go to where we now think that's where the problem is. And when you irradiate there, you'll usually find that it gets hot there. Well, if I hold it there against my teeth for a while, it always gets warm. That also means nothing other than somewhere in the neck or the tooth. Well, that suggests there is a problem somewhere. It could then mean that there's a problem with a certain tooth, that you may also have a problem with your intestines. There's always a correlation. We're very, very complex systems where everything is somehow connected. And these are the meridians. And you should always irradiate your teeth as well, because teeth are the cause of an incredible number of diseases. And when you've had a root-treated tooth and somehow, unfortunately, with the repair, a bacterium then somehow nested there, it can create toxins that can be floating around throughout the body. With your experiences, have you already recognised foci of inflammation during the treatment through this fielding of this cell electrics to such an extent that this inflammation has subsided? We have a really bad case, but a healer had to help me. I'm usually only convinced when I can say I can prove why something works, otherwise I recommend nothing. And we didn't know where it came from. He had inflammatory pulmonary fibrosis. And then this healer said he has inflamed teeth. And these inflamed teeth were treated with various measures. That was one of them. And the inflammatory pulmonary fibrosis has reverted to non-inflammatory. A lung specialist gave him only 6 months to live, and he's been doing relatively well for over 2 years. So he's not healed now, but the main problem seems to have come from the teeth. And also very interesting with teeth, especially before or after operations, it's almost a miracle device when you prepare yourself with it, and afterwards I think you've had an experience like this before. I placed an implant and then at some point the injection stopped working. Then comes the pounding, and then I really put it there, and half an hour later everything was gone. And most importantly, the day after the operation, if you irradiate before and after, there's no swelling. And the healing process is accelerated. The dentists say, what did they do? I've never seen that before. That's really, really awesome. So the mitochondria are simply activated. They provide provide as much energy as possible. The blood becomes very thin, has a high flow rate. That means there's an extremely large amount of oxygen that gets there. At the same time, I make the water hexagonal with this irradiation. We've already discussed this before. It's an extreme advantage because then foci of inflammation, toxins are drained immediately. Then when I have hexagonal water, the body will again do an ingenious measure. Hydrogen peroxide's formed. And hydrogen peroxide then kills germs and bacteria. The body produces it itself, but I have to put it in a position. All measures that we take at the Cell Energy Center are to activate self-regulation. Self-regulation, self-healing processes, they can do any job in the world. But I just have to eliminate the hindrance, provide the energy, the right minerals, vital substances. I understand the logic, but what if, for example, people have rheumatic complaints on a finger? Logically, it would have to get better immediately. That is, the pain would have to go away, not the cause. So there can always be malnutrition or a bottle of white wine a day, yeah? Well, there are instant solutions in the sense of pain disappearing immediately. I often see it too, but there are also cases where you just have to wait a little longer. And at the same time, I always have to say, find out the real cause. Find out the real cause. We have the therapists and the doctors for that. And then you have to talk a lot, otherwise you won't find out the real cause. Many things have a psychosomatic background. And if I'm not taking my time with people, I can't find the real background. So that's my experience. And then neither frequency will help nor medication will help. If I don't eliminate the real cause, then I've only fought symptoms. I have to see that I fight the cause. Exactly. But you get time. If you really recharge these cell electrics, back to the topic, with energy, then I gain time. Then I gain time. For example, if I now have a tumour cell, as I said, I have to gain time. I have to gain time. The tumour cells now solve my sugar problem, perhaps solve germs and spores for me, and so forth, but there must be something else that makes it have to do all this. And stress is a huge issue, and lack of adrenaline is a huge issue. Maybe there are some toxins in the body. If you have something like this, a detoxification measure is always useful. Whether that's spirulina, chlorella, I think more of zeolite and tinder fungus, but that's another topic. I'm a big fan of micronized volcanic soil. And then you have to use clean products. They can also be contaminated, but I think a lot of medically certified products, and at the same time maybe change the diet a bit to more ketogenic. So cut down on carbs, cut down on sugar, reduce those things, and the other is energetic work. On the one hand, I have to activate the parasympathetic tone. Parasympathetic is basically the nerve area in the autonomic nervous system that is responsible for regeneration and so on. Rest, the relaxation mode, responsible for cell renewal. And that's mostly deactivated with us because we're always in a state of stress. Stress is the main issue, and Bruce Lipton is one of the best-known cell researchers in the world. He once said 95% of all diseases are based on the body's response to physiological stress. It's crazy. Well, that's a lot, and of course we now know more and more now. We've information overload, we've electric smog. Our food contains many pesticides and fungicides and all sorts of things. Water could also usually be a bit better. I'm not at all satisfied with what the public utility companies are doing there. I always say the water isn't toxic at best because it doesn't erase the negative information. Or, for example, I don't know anyone, maybe there are some who offer it, because like in homeopathy, where I have positive information without a molecule in it, and the information simply uses the memory effect of the water, so I always have the negative aspect of water, that if I had fluoride, chlorine, hydrocarbons, some hormones, antibiotics or glyphosate in it beforehand, which normal filters more or less don't get out. If I filter out molecularly, I have to also erase the information. Otherwise, this information will still be in the memory effect. So that's no use to me. It's a homeopathic. Now, we basically have a negative homeopathic like we have a nocebo in the mental realm. If we then swirl it, we have a high potency. I get it. So, dear Peer, thank you very much. I've learned an incredible amount, especially now about this cycle, this cancer cycle. Now, it's actually clear why the body responds like that. I was very grateful and learned that. And many thanks again. And you, dear viewers, I hope that this program was able to show you how it works on a small scale via this cell electrics. But if it works on a small scale, it is of course possible for the body to react better to being unwell, to its illness, to its inflammation, and can take over the self-healing again. And I sincerely wish you that you stay healthy. Stay fit, stay happy, and keep watching QS24. Thanks for watching. See you next time.